You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 13th of May, 2025, on Monocle Radio.
Has Donald Trump helped get another centre-left government re-elected? Will Trump be bringing a new 747 home from the Middle East? And should rivers be considered people? I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Terry Stiastny and Ash Bhardwaj will discuss the day's big stories, and we'll hear from Maiwand Banayi about his new memoir recalling his escape from the Taliban, not only from oppression by them, but membership of them. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller. I'm joined today by Terry Stiastny, political journalist and author of Believable Lies, a book we will be plugging remorselessly very shortly, and by Ash Bhardwaj, journalist and author of Why We Travel, which we may always also rather do likewise for. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Hello.
Terry, first of all, it's out at last. Regular listeners will be aware of a years-long campaign of foreshadowing on this book, and during which you've assiduously said, no, I can't possibly talk about it. I can't even really reveal the title or what the heck it's about. But the day has dawned.
The day has dawned. The book is out on the 12th of June. As you said, it's called Believable Lies. And it is about a secret organisation. So I feel all the secrecy was kind of justified. So it was about an organisation in the Second World War called the Political Warfare Executive, which one of the main things it did was create deliberate fake news. And they broadcast radio stations into occupied Europe, which pretended that they were in Germany, Italy, the Balkans, and they were in fact in Woburn Abbey and around the area. So, and it's full of kind of crazy characters and, you know, all the exploits they got up to during the war.
Well, many congratulations. This is exciting. I know it has been a long time in the offing, and I do reassure our listeners that it will be caned absolutely mercilessly in coming weeks. But is it available for pre-order and all of that stuff?
It is available for pre-order and all of that stuff. It's published by W.H. Allen and is, you know, available hopefully in all good, you know, pre-ordering areas, bookshops and other things.
And that title again?
Believable Lies.
By Terry Stiastny. Ash, welcome to the Daily. Your first time here, so as is traditional, you are wearing the owl costume, so your subsequent appearances on the show will be more comfortable and less muffled, but I think you are wearing it commendably well. Briefly, if you could introduce yourself to our listeners, explain who you are, how you got here, etc., and if you want to flog your book at the end of that as well, that seems to be what we're doing. Go ahead.
No, thank you. It's great to be here. So I am a journalist and a broadcaster. My background is travel journalism. I used to be a ski instructor and lived in various interesting spots around the world. And from there, I ended up writing for the papers. And then that moved into a bit of broadcast as well. I was also...
So is it fair to say you were a ski instructor and then it was all downhill?
It was literally all downhill from there, usually tumbling and stumbling as well. And then I've also started to move into a bit of defence and security journalism. I spent some time as an Army reservist, which just gave me an interest in that field. And so I try and combine the two with the travel. And my book, Why We Travel, 12 Reasons for Travel and What They Can Teach Us About Life, it's kind of a smart thinking book. So it takes a bit of psychology and philosophy and tries to find ways to make travel more fulfilling.
And is available presumably in all fine stores.
It is, although the distributors might have had a bit of a trip up for a day or two. I think it should be in the stores now.
OK, well, we will have more from both of you shortly, but we will start in Albania, where Prime Minister Edi Rama of the governing Socialist Party appears to have eased to a fourth consecutive term in this past weekend's election, actually improving somewhat on the party's vote share in the previous election of 2021. The election itself got reasonable reviews from the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, though an amount of discomfort was expressed at the way in which the Socialist Party rather made the most of its grip on the levers of institutional power. Well, I'm joined now with more on this by Guy Delaunay, Monocle's Balkans correspondent. Guy, the result probably not hugely surprising, but is the margin?
The margin's very large, isn't it? They're still counting, I have to say. Almost all of the ballot boxes are counted, but we still have the diaspora vote being counted as well now, which is the first time the diaspora has been able to vote in an Albanian parliamentary election. And it's significant potentially because, of course, Albania's got a very large diaspora all over Europe and in various parts of the world as well. So they've been able to vote for the first time in this particular election. But yeah, the margin is 18 percentage points at the moment. It's looking like Socialists of Edi Rama on 52%. The coalition led by the opposition Democratic Party, who are a right-wing party led by the former President and Prime Minister Sali Berisha, currently on 34%. And if you're looking at what that means in Parliament, it means 82 seats for Edi Rama and company in a parliament which only holds 140 MPs. So it's going to be very comfortable for them in this unprecedented fourth term that they're going to go into.
We did discuss on the Foreign Desk on Saturday the possibility that Donald Trump was having a somewhat inadvertent run in getting centre-left governments re-elected around the world, Canada, Australia, possibly Poland. Is that a factor in this election as well? Did the Socialists tag their Conservative opponents as the party of Trump?
Well, you actually had the people who'd advised Trump advising the Democratic Party, advising Sali Berisha. So you had Chris Lasavita, who'd been one of the main advisors to Donald Trump's successful 2024 election campaign, was working for, and I think that the term working for is best used here because he was clearly being paid to work for the Democratic Party. And he, very early on in this sort of process, used the phrase, we're going to make Albania great again. Now, as you can see how problematic that might be, Andrew, as somebody who knows the region well.
Yeah, I'm not sure which sunlit uplands of Albanian history you would be hearkening back to exactly, but Edi Rama, of course, is now this extraordinarily dominant figure in terms of modern Albanian politics. Berisha used to be. How did they try to land a glove on Rama during this campaign? What did they attempt, clearly unsuccessfully, to make issues out of?
Well, OK, so you've got Sali Berisha, who is under US sanctions for corruption, has been under house arrest in Albania on corruption charges, is now out of house arrest, but is still facing corruption charges, accusing Edi Rama of running a corrupt government with links to organised crime. You know, it's for all of the problems that Edi Rama's ministers and indeed the mayor of Tirana have had. I mean, the mayor of Tirana at the moment is in custody or facing corruption charges. You can say that in spades for Sali Berisha and the Democratic Party as well. So it wasn't really going to make a difference in the eyes of the voters. If you've got the corrupt man over here saying that man over there is corrupt, it's not going to make a big difference for the voters. What the voters really wanted to see was whether their country was going to be making progress. And the key thing which comes up again and again is we want a future which means our young people don't have to leave.
Well, as part of that, Edi Rama has talked a lot about, his overarching ambition of steering Albania into the European Union, which is something he seems to think can be done by 2030. That is not all that far away. How likely is that, do you think?
He's not just talking about 2030 for accession. He's talking about completing the actual negotiation process by the end of 2027. So that's about 2.5 years away. It's very ambitious, but I think it's time to be ambitious with European Union expansion because they haven't been. I mean, I say this over and over again, Andrew, so pardon me if I sound like a stuck record to regular listeners to Monocle Radio, but the European Union said back in 2003 with the Thessaloniki Declaration, we want the countries of the Western Balkans in the European Union. Well, we're 22 years down the line, and we've only got Croatia added as a member in that time. And that was 12 years ago. Now, if you consider what happened within 22 years of the Second World War, for example, I mean, you had Tokyo hosting the Olympics. That would be one pretty good example of things that changed rapidly. A few years down the line from that, you had Germany also hosting the Olympics. I mean, those countries were moving very quickly back into the international fold. What is it that makes the European Union such an exclusive club if it says that the countries of the Western Balkans are crucial to its security and its prosperity? Why hasn't it done more to get them on board? If they're lacking somehow, give them what they lack. And I think Edi Rama maybe is finding himself in a moment where the European Union are acutely aware of this, bearing in mind everything that's going on to the east of Albania at the moment.
And just finally, Guy, back to Edi Rama himself. I can recall interviewing him in Tirana shortly after he was elected the first time, and that was 12 years ago. He's already been in office a very, very long time. He has another full term ahead of him. Is he beginning to give the air of a man who intends to bang on interminably?
Edi Rama doesn't really give that sort of air. I mean, he's very good at presentation, as you know. I mean, this is a man who will turn up at European summits, and he will be, for starters, the tallest man in the room, although I think Aleksandar Vučić of Serbia gives him a good run for his money. But he'll be, certainly one of the most striking figures in the room, usually dressed in a very particular way, quite casual, but also stylish at the same time. He's a painter, he's an artist, and he presents as such. He's still very good at playing that game. And we saw over the weekend, we didn't just have an election in Albania, we had 3 stages of the Giro d'Italia cycling race. Now, that's quite a way of saying, look, we've made progress in this country. Here's a big international sporting event. What's more, the eyes of the world, or at least the sort of people who follow cycling, which, hello, I'm definitely one of those. But, these people are watching our country. They can see what we've got here, because you get all these beautiful shots of the Albanian mountains, coast, all of the construction work that's gone on in Tirana in recent years, all under Edi Rama and the Socialist Party, and he's able to point to that. But he's also able to say, I'm not finished yet.
Guy Delonne, thank you for joining us. You're listening to The Daily with me, Andrew Muller. Let's bring our panel back in now and go to Riyadh, where US President Donald Trump has arrived to begin a Middle East tour already shrouded in controversy over the reported offer by Qatar of a $400 million custom-fitted Boeing 747 to replace one of the venerable antiques currently serving as Air Force One. Trump has begun the trip by signing a $142 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia and having lunch with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and a host of American tycoons, including Elon Musk, who put on a suit and tie for this one, and the CEOs of Citigroup, OpenAI, BlackRock and Nvidia. Terry, first of all, we will come to the aircraft possible scandal shortly, but if we just focus on today's events, US President signs massive arms deal with Saudi Arabia, brings a whole bunch of business and tech leaders along with him to Saudi Arabia. If we leave aside the portable McDonald's franchise apparently assembled by the Saudis just to keep Donald Trump amused, it's not actually anything that unusual, is it?
No, I mean, in the past there have been plenty of US, arms deals with Saudi Arabia, but I think, what we are getting today is the usual sort of Donald Trump hyperbole about this being the largest deal in history, and talking about the importance of the Saudi investment, particularly in things like AI in the United States, and a big show of being very chummy with Mohammed bin Salman. And I think, a lot of the complication of this is going to be in the detail. And if you look a bit more closely on things like energy and things like minerals, as we saw with the UK so-called trade deal, a lot of this is just kind of heads of terms. It is the outline of an agreement, and it is not necessarily, a signed and detailed agreement. But I think what they're trying to do is make this like a big trade fair and try to focus slightly less on the strategic implications, even though those are obviously quite big, given what Trump has been saying about Syria and about Iran. Yeah,
Ash, on that subject, I realise I was about to say, leaving aside the $142 billion arms deal, let's just leave aside $142 billion. Does this seem to be more about economics than strategy, this visit?
Well, there has to be a strategic aspect to it, particularly because of what's been going on in Yemen. And obviously we had those signal messages that came out recently. And it appears that the US has already started to withdraw its efforts on the uptick in attacks it was making in Yemen. What appeared to have been an 8 or 9 month plan has already seemed to have been wound back and a sort of victory declared. I think it was either the Wall Street Journal or New York Times was talking about an F-35 that was nearly shot down recently by Houthi air defense over Yemen. So I imagine that the US in the way it's been asking Europe to step up in Ukraine, probably wants to see Saudi Arabia taking on even more of a responsibility of the security overseeing the Red Sea, trying to ensure freedom of movement through that passage there. So there's definitely a very strong strategic element there. And then Trump's also got this interest in building a deal with Iran. At the moment, it looks like the likely deal is simply going to be what America already had under Obama some years ago, that Trump then ripped up. So this relationship with Saudi Arabia, having a stronger position over what's happening in Yemen, maybe having some influence over what's going to be happening with Iran, and then also the impact of what this means for Israel and Gaza. We know that Netanyahu has wanted Trump to come to Israel during this trip, and he hasn't managed to get that to happen. So it seems that the relationship with Saudi Arabia matters an awful lot to them, and it must be more than just business.
Well, Terry, he is going to Qatar tomorrow. This much we do know. There are conflicting reports about this alleged offer of a $400 million tricked-out, custom-made Boeing 747 that the Qataris are offering to give Donald Trump. That would be pretty flagrant even by Trump standards, wouldn't it? I mean, is this the kind of thing that might actually even register with his fans?
Well, it does seem to be the kind of thing that is already registering with his fans. I mean, it's certainly registering with his opponents, but there do seem to be some people who are normally kind of MAGA cheerleaders saying, actually, you shouldn't be taking, gifts like this from foreign governments. Particularly when you get to keep it afterwards, which is quite the most astonishing thing. The idea that it is somehow donated to the Trump presidential library and presumably not just parked on the forecourt there. It seems a very, very strange thing to do. And of course, Trump is trying to make out that this is a good deal because he's getting something for free, and everyone's going, yes, the point is that you're not supposed to get something for free from another country, particularly, any country at all, let alone one that's in such a, contested region.
I mean, do we think, Ash, there's the slightest chance that the Qataris are just thinking of this as a purely munificent gesture with absolutely no quid pro quo attached to it? It's just like, it's like Elvis Presley giving Cadillacs to his retinue. It's like, here's a 747, enjoy yourself.
I mean, these rules about what you're allowed to receive do exist for a reason.
They do.
And I can't imagine somebody is giving away $400 million worth of stuff purely out of the goodness of their heart. And from a security perspective, the idea of having another nation give you a plane in which you're conducting top-level government business, I can't imagine members of the NSA and CIA being particularly happy about this either.
Well, no, fun fact, which did ring a bell somewhere, and I looked up, I had remembered it more or less correctly. About 20 years ago, Terry, China's then President Jiang Zemin ordered a new plane from Boeing. It was diverted via Texas, where various private companies fitted it out. And when Chinese security operatives had a bit of a look over it upon its delivery, they discovered 27 listening devices aboard, and those were just the ones they found. I mean, Donald Trump is somebody who famously just gets away with everything, but could he really try to get away with this?
I think he can certainly try, and he will certainly try, but I think this might be possibly an issue where, members of Congress, members of the Senate might actually begin to push back about it. I know so far they have been, pretty slow on doing that. But yeah, given the security issues and the fact you would think you would have to take the plane literally to pieces again and then rebuild it in order to make it something that is secure and usable, let alone, the idea of having a gift. British politicians, if they're given, a sort of a souvenir mug, pretty much have to declare it and write it in the, Declaration of Members' Interests and then probably give it back or make a donation to charity. As you said, these rules are there for a reason.
Just finally on this subject, Ash, some suggestion that after he visits Qatar tomorrow and the United Arab Emirates on Thursday, he might swing by the alleged peace talks in Turkey between Russia and Ukraine. So far, President Zelensky of Ukraine is insisting he will go, and he is perfectly willing to be photographed negotiating with an empty chair if President Putin of Russia does not show up. Is there any point in Trump turning up if Putin isn't there?
It depends on how Trump wants to position himself. And ultimately, Putin has really been caught out by just trying to distract and delay, because Putin's suggestion of having these talks on Thursday, which was Putin's idea that he came out with on Sunday night, was a way to sidestep the Europeans and a way to completely ignore this request for a 30-day ceasefire. And then Zelensky and the Europeans had wanted the ceasefire before any peace talks happened. Trump then tweeted out, Zelensky, go and have the meeting. And then Zelensky said, yeah, sure, I'll go and do it. And now Putin is coming up with all sorts of excuses about, well, you can't just have two leaders meeting without months of preparation. But of course, it was Putin's idea. So I think it depends on... Trump put out this message on Truth Social the other week about whether or not he's being tapped along by Putin. And I guess the question now is he getting to that point where he is figuring out that actually that's what Putin is doing? In which case he might just turn up, and if that happens and he puts his support behind Ukraine, then it's a very different situation from where we were at last week.
Well, indeed so. To the world of travel now, which is this year tilting Asiaward, at least according to a new report by the MasterCard Economics Institute. Of its top 10 trending summer destinations for 2025, fully 6 are in Asia. They are Tokyo, Osaka, Seoul, Beijing, Shanghai and Singapore, with Nha Trang and Fukuoka in 11th and 12th. The rest of the world is represented in the top 10 by Paris, Palma de Mallorca, Madrid and Rio de Janeiro. Yet again, this broadcaster's birthplace of Wagga Wagga, New South Wales, languishes cruelly disregarded. Terry, would you care to endorse any of these choices? Do you have recent experience of any of these top 10 trending summer destinations?
I'm feeling really bad that I haven't been to any of these places recently. I'm thinking, but we keep planning a trip to Japan and then it never quite happens. So maybe in a year or two it will be the thing that we get round to doing. Certainly as a family. I mean, I'd like to go to Paris. I've been to Mallorca, but not to Palma. I've been to one of the middling-y beach destinations. I think the interesting thing about it is it seems to be very heavily focused on cities and big city travel. And these are not places where you're just going to go for 2 weeks and lie on a beach. These seem to be very much places that people want to go and see sights. I mean, yes, there are great beaches near Singapore, but you wouldn't necessarily go there for your beach holiday, if that was the only reason you were going. So I think it's maybe a suggestion people want to go and explore a bit more.
I mean, Ash, it's not obviously before this summer, unheard of for people to travel to Asia. People have been doing that for quite a while now. But nevertheless, is Asia having something of a moment?
Absolutely. And the two in particular that are having a moment are Korea and Japan. I mean, the Philippines has been doing quite well for a while for beach holidays, as it happens, and wider landscape. Indonesia also. But Japan has really started to have a moment in the last few years, not just because of manga and so on, which was popular in the UK in the 90s, but there's been a lot of YouTubers and influencers going there. And the legacy of Anthony Bourdain, who was, I think, the first person to really put that into the public conscious of Americans in particular. Of course, America and Japan have got this history going back to the occupation of Japan after World War II. But they have baseball there and other things like that. What makes Japan so fascinating is it was the first Asian nation to start to look outwardly Western, skyscraper cities, people wearing suits, an economy that looks similar to
Except
ours.
it still looked really weirdly different, though.
And that's what makes Japan so interesting. You get this surface of where it appears similar, but culturally, the culture remains very strong underneath, ranging from food to behaviour. I was there recently doing a pilgrimage walk around the Kamano Kodo Trail on the Kii Peninsula. And it's just amazing how you can get this access to this fascinating, not just religion, but this way of life in both Shinto and esoteric Buddhism. So it's a very rewarding place to visit.
I mean, we talked about Saudi Arabia earlier in the show, Terry, and one of the other things coming up in the report is that there are rising visitor numbers for Saudi Arabia. Now, there's one obvious reason for that, which is it's really only been recently that it was possible for anybody to visit Saudi Arabia, except in the context of pilgrimage. But are you surprised / heartened by that? I mean, I kind of like the idea that people are at least curious and want to go and have a look.
Yeah, I think there are certainly some encouraging signs within Saudi in order to get people to travel there as tourists, they certainly have to be a bit more liberal, particularly towards women. I mean, I'm a woman, I'm a journalist. Both of those things in the past have meant that I would probably not have been able to go to Saudi at all, even if I'd wanted to. And now that is more possible. But I think one of the difficulties, as I've talked to people who've been to Saudi recently for work, and they say there is still this level of sort of double standards of what is expected for Saudis and what is expected for foreigners. And I'm not sure how long they're going to be able to continue with that balance, particularly because they're trying to attract influencers and so on, and they are allowing, say, women influencers to do things that obviously Saudi women can't do in terms of dress and where they go and what they do.
One other detail which leaps out, other than the top 10, Ash, and perhaps not surprising, but decreasing visitor numbers for the United States, which is becoming an increasingly noticeable trend.
Yeah, some of the numbers looked worse than they really were, some of the reports that came out, because Easter was a bit later this year than it was last year. So it looked like numbers were further down than they were. But definitely the long-term trends. So bookings from Canada and Mexico are down about 30% for the summer. Long-term summer bookings from Western Europe were also down about 20%.
I mean,
so
these are huge amounts of money.
Yeah, it's a vast amount of money. And, 10% is thousands of jobs that disappear. The places that won't be affected are Florida, New York, those big ticket trips that people plan for years for their birthdays or for their kids' birthdays. I think the places in the US that are going to be more affected are the second and third visits. So going out into northern Georgia to find some stories of indigenous culture or indigenous heritage, or people taking road trips. They might just go to Canada instead, where there's incredible national parks. Back to the point we were talking about with Saudi Arabia, that's also related to the US. These are both places with huge marketing budgets, and that can make quite a big difference. Saudi Arabia has spent vast amounts of money at events, putting stuff into newspapers and magazines. And the other thing that's going for the US at the moment is it's a very weak dollar. So it's about 30% less expensive to travel to the US, spending money once you're there, than it was 2 years ago. Inflation may have made a difference as a product of tariffs, but it's still pulling people there in a way that people weren't quite expecting a couple of months ago.
Well, to Switzerland now, the mania of the citizens of which for abstruse referenda is regularly of value to current affairs podcasts such as this, the Monocle Daily, and today is no exception. The people of the canton of Lucerne may shortly be asked to vote on whether or not to assign legal personhood to their admittedly extremely pretty rivers and lakes. This would not mean, to be clear, that anybody would be obliged to address them as Mr. Rus or Ms. Zug, or apologise for stepping in them or whatever, but that they would become legal entities on whose behalf actions could be taken in court and so forth. Terry, where will it all end?
I think this is not as absurd an idea as it might sound at first. I mean, in terms of law, the law of the sea is a real thing. So seas have laws and legal rules. And so maybe rivers should be able to have be recognised in some sense, because I think it's not necessarily that they have rights and you can say, that the Thames is very cross because you threw a plastic bag in it. But we got a duty to look after them. And, do not start me on the current situation of water in London, because my kitchen was under far too much of it yesterday afternoon. But we need to look after the water. We need to look after the rivers and not be chucking so much sewage into them. And if this is a way to make that happen, and recognise that we have a common interest and a duty to look after them, then I think that's possibly a good thing.
Ash, you have experience, I think, of a river to whom such status has been assigned.
Yeah, I love this. I've kayaked down the Wanganui River in New Zealand, which is the first river to gain the legal status of personhood back in 2017, I think it was. And in New Zealand, it is both built on Maori concepts of identity and personhood for natural places, but also there is this legal reasoning of it gives it stake and it gives it protection and it gives it recourse in the courts of law. And it might sound ridiculous, but then giving corporations legal status is also ridiculous. These are all conceptual ideas. And given that the systems that we already do have in place to protect the commons and other resources that we all depend on don't seem to be working, if this is a system that does start to work, then I think that's excellent. But also, I just like the idea of it. It makes us think differently about rivers and these amazing natural resources we have. An amazing mountain in New Zealand also has a status of personhood. An entire mountainous region and forest area also has it. It works in Ecuador.
But to follow that up, as far as it's possible to tell, has passing laws of this sort, if what we're interested in is what actually works, have they worked in terms of protecting these rivers, these mountains, these forests? Are they better off than they were?
In New Zealand, I think it's done two things. One, it's changed the narrative, changed the conversation, and it is starting to, I don't know about any details of specific legal events in New Zealand, but in Ecuador, they have started to use it. And also, it led on to a couple of referenda in Ecuador. So I think the way that it is changing the conception and the way people think about nature is as important as the legal cases that can be brought as a product of these rivers having personhood.
But to bring it back finally to your point, Terry, about there's been a series of just deeply dismal scandals in this country over the last few years about the state of its rivers and beaches and so on. And the trouble is, in the United Kingdom, given the media culture that it has, you can imagine what the response would be to any such suggestion along these lines. It will be, where will it all end? Will trees be voting next? To which you could argue that the trees could hardly make worse choices than some human citizens of the United Kingdom in recent years. But is there an argument for it if it does reinforce the idea that these are, if they're not necessarily sentient, they are still living things?
Yes, I think we're doing it in quite a British way at the moment, in that we've got a former pop star who's basically campaigning Fergal Sharkey to try and clean up rivers around England, and is, going to talk to Parliament about it, and hauling in the water companies to try and say, look, you're paying enormous bonuses to some of your management and you are not keeping the rivers clean, and the authorities. So I think, that's the way we have been looking at it. I think, yes, there would probably be quite a lot of mockery if we tried to say, let's all sort of go and commune with the River Thames, or it would be sort of treated in that sort of way. But I think there is more of an awareness that we need to do something more about it, and if that takes legislation, and if it takes more stringent rules, then that would be a good way of going about it.
Terry Stiasny and Ash Bhardwaj, thank you both for joining us. Finally, on today's show, we do not hear a great deal by way of memoir from former members of the Taliban. It is not a vocation with tremendous long-term prospects, nor a movement which encourages literacy in its ranks, all of which makes Maiwan Banayi's new book, Delusions of Paradise, such a remarkable read. As a boy growing up in Kabul, later a refugee camp in Pakistan, he aspired to a talib's black turban. Unlike many, he thought better of it and managed to build himself a new life in Ireland. I spoke to Maiwand at Midori House earlier and began by asking how close he came to properly joining the Taliban's jihad.
I was studying in madrasa. Then when I was 16, 17, my biggest inspiration in life was to become a martyr and participate in jihad. In 1996, when the Taliban took power, I went to Kabul, and then I went to Maidan Shar, where my cousin had already picked guns with the Taliban. There was Commander Amanullah, so they were running his garrison. And then I learned how to fire guns, and then they showed me how to kind of fire rocket launchers. So I was staying there for a few weeks, but I stayed for a really long period of time, and I was willing to attach myself to one of the battalion to be sent to Shomali province to fight against Masouds.
Mm-hmm. This is the Northern Alliance.
Yeah, Northern Alliances. But then what happened, my cousin said that I don't have your father's permissions, he informed my uncle, but I still persisted because I had this kind of strong desire to be martyred and to participate in jihad and bring about Sharia. But then my father came after me, and then he had a big fight with my cousin that he was indoctrinating me. Even then, when I left from there, I still had a burning desire to be in jihad from there on, and then I wanted to enroll in Haqqaniya Madrasa. If you know him, it's 2-hour drive from Peshawar. So that's like the biggest producer of militant jihadists and some
This
of the
is in
senior
Pakistan,
Taliban.
in the
That is
northwest frontier.
Pakistan, yeah, because I was already in madrasa, but that madrasa was a day border madrasa. Then I wanted to kind of get enrolled into that kind of full boarding madrasa. So I traveled with my cousin to graduation ceremony, and I have detailed that in the book, and I was really, really inspired there. And then the next time when I went, the admission was complete, and the madrasa in the camp kind of shut its door. Then my father was really kind of insisting me that to do something. So, but then I had put my name there because admission was full for the next year for the Haqqaniya. And then I just got admission in Peshawar, and it was somehow a secular school there. From then on, my thought changed. But again, in 1997 as well, I traveled again to Maidan Shar to participate with the Taliban. But then at that time, you know, I had that desire. When I had it there, it has kind of become diminished there. It didn't have it.
This is what's interesting about your book, because as listeners will have guessed from the fact that you're sitting here now, your life did not turn out like that. You've gone on to build a life in the United Kingdom, in Ireland, in Europe. You've ended up helping British soldiers with their back pain, which is an extraordinary irony. But extraordinarily, though, you do get to a place of rejecting all of this and deciding that you don't believe this and you don't want this, which is, I think, amazing in any context. I think anywhere in the world, in any situation, it's much easier for people to just go along with whatever the prevailing belief is. And you decided not to do that in an extraordinary, difficult environment to do that. This is not, I mean, I can remember briefly visiting Afghanistan at around this time in the late 1990s. This was not a place and not a regime that encouraged or tolerated dissent or free thought. When you were writing the book and reflecting on that time, did you come to any conclusions as to why you were able to change your mind and walk away from it, but so many other people do not?
Yeah. My thing was, it was just, I'd say, the twist of certain events. Had it not been for the twist of those certain events, probably it would have been difficult. I do consider myself, I had a bit of curiosity from the beginning, and then maybe my father's skepticism, because it was something from my childhood there. I think part of was that, and then again when I moved and then kind of got admission in the new school, those lads, you know, they have lived in Kabul, and they were from rich families. Some of them, they had their parents and brothers in abroad, so they didn't have that strict Islamic mentality. But then the main thing that happened is exposure to science. It's just a process, you know. It was just not, you know, one-off thing. Yeah,
it is an extraordinary story. We have not heard the half of it in this interview. People do really need to read the book to understand the entirety of the journey you've made. But if you could just maybe finally just bring us up to date. What is your life like now? What are you doing?
Well, I'm just doing my final year MSc in physiotherapy, pre-registration physiotherapy and leadership in Coventry University. But prior to that, I done a degree in athletic therapy and sports injury rehabilitation in Carlow, and then I had a kind of another postgraduate certificate in neuromuscular therapy. But I work with military as well for on and off like a few years. So I'm just hoping to graduate by end of this year.
That was Mewand Abaniyi speaking to me earlier. His book Delusions of Paradise is out now. And that is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our guests today, Guy Delorny, Teres Diasny and Ash Bardwaj. Today's show was produced by Laura Kramer and researched by Francesca Jilks. Our sound engineer was Elliot Greenfield with Faith Eden. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.